Hey, what's up, everyone? My name is Andre, and this is a Tennis and Bagels podcast. A podcast about pretty much everything tennis, from recreational to professional tour, and essentially a lot of my opinion as well, because, there's a lot of tennis journalists out there and really awesome podcasts that you can listen to. I don't necessarily need to be bringing tons of news, but in fact, today is a day that I actually want to touch upon a couple news things that have happened in the tennis world as of lately. And the thing is, with all the crises with the coronavirus and quarantining and even borders closing and all of that, we obviously didn't have any tennis being played since Indian Wells, where I recorded episode number 6.5. And that was like breaking news, everything is canceling, we don't have tennis. And at that point we were just trying to be hopeful about it and just be like, oh yeah, maybe in April or June it will come back. And nope, of course it wouldn't, because this is a pandemic and this is a much more serious thing than we would have hoped it to be. But honestly, safety first and health first. So all things considered, obviously we are really happy that there was no tennis, no big events, and no major issues with that. And speaking of major issues with big crowds and things like that, before I just start talking about like the comeback talks about tennis and how serious those plans are at this point, a few things happened this week, and I think they are worth talking about, because it's not like no tennis at all was happening. No professional player was actually touching a racket and playing against each other. A couple things happened in the meantime, and some exhibition tournaments, and two of them were really like anticipated and brought a lot of attention to them. The first one being Djokovic's, I think it's Adria Tour, and this was a major controversial tournament that happened in Serbia for a few reasons. The one that is the most important to consider is the fact that he made the tournament and they played with full crowds. Like the stadiums that they were playing in, I think they would probably be housing about 2,000 to maybe 5,000 people, which is a lot of people together sitting side by side. Nobody was wearing masks, and they were just kind of, the players were hugging each other. You'd see videos of them coming in the airport and just kind of hugging and touching. Essentially no social distancing at all in that tournament. And things went really well. People had a lot of fun. Players had a lot of fun. Djokovic didn't win. I don't actually remember who did. Maybe it was team. Yeah, so full stadium. They had a kids' day. They had a press tent. The first thing that they did was like having a soccer match with a bunch of players and stuff like that. And a few things that are important to mention is that Serbia's case is not nearly as worse as bad as some places in Europe were, or some places in America are right now. And when I say America, I mean North and South America. So things in Serbia aren't as awful. Things aren't looking as bad in there, but at the same time, it's just kind of like it's still in a pandemic, and there's still like concerns about health and stuff like that, right? Obviously, but all of that happened, and a lot of players and journalists were very critical about that attitude about the tournament because of that, and one of the reasons also why is because Djokovic was very much against the comeback of the tour in the US Open, really. Most specifically, the US Open, the Grand Slam that happens in the end of the year. Well, in the end of the year, the last Grand Slam of the year, which happens at the end of August and beginning of September. Because he was saying about... I don't think he actually mentioned health concerns, but he was saying that the measures that they were taking, the safety measures that the US Open personnel were taking, were quite extreme for him, and people were critical about him because well, how come you talk about extreme measures in the U.S. and then you come and like you say that you're not even coming to the U.S. to play the U.S. Open, but then you host a tour of this magnitude with this many people with no social distancing at all, and some people are really mad, and it's controversial in that sense. I kind of get it because Serbia has really got the situation under control. Um, but one of the things that happened, it was quite intense. I would say like it wasn't very nice. Let's put it that way. So Djokovic was in contact with a basketball player in Serbia who tested positive for the COVID-19, and part of the tour, one of the legs in Montenegro was canceled, and obviously tons of history in between Serbia and Montenegro. But I don't know, politically, health safety stuff. This encounter that Djokovic had with a player that later on tested positive was very negative and caused that Montenegro leg of the Adria tour being cancelled. So that's that. Djokovic has had his share of controversies already during this quarantine times. Normally his controversies are normally about how people say that he's fake or he just wants attention and whatnot. But now he's gotten into a few more scientifical and health issues. Health. What's the word? Like health related problems and controversy. So yeah, this has not really been a great year for Djokovic's personal brand, I would say. But yeah. And the other tournament, which I'm not going to spend much time talking, and by the way, I haven't really watched anything because I find it was really hard to find streaming for any of those exhibition matches that they were putting up. I think it's just on most of them is on Tennis TV and WTA TV, the app, and maybe I don't know ESPN or whatever. But I don't have cable, and I'm not really paying for Tennis TV right now, so that's a thing. So I didn't really watch anything. And the other tournament that was interesting was the UTS, which I completely forgot it's Ultimate Tennis something. I know it fits in it, but it's not something. I don't know what the S stands for at this point. But it was a exhibition tournament put in place by Patrick Mouratoglou, Serena Williams' coach, and in the owner of one of the biggest tennis academies in the world. And in this tennis academy, he's a bunch of big players are practicing there regularly, like Felix Auger-Aliassime and Tsitsipas. They practice there, and obviously Mouratoglou is the coach of Serena Williams. So the guy has a lot of presence in the tennis world, and he puts up this tournament, which it was just insane. He was first, like, I guess to put in some context before I explain what was crazy about it. And honestly, in my opinion, I think is good crazy, especially because it was an exhibition. But Patrick Mouratoglou says that tennis is loose, but for tennis, it's not really the case. You just kind of go and you serve, and that's it. And stalling it's a little bit subjective. It's way too subjective, I would say, in tennis. Like, there is a few things that I can do, like in terms of you have 25 seconds to serve to put the ball in play. And maybe that's kind of like the rule that they might have used for it and whatnot. But it was just a little weird. And one other thing that really bothered me a lot is that, like, you could obviously, if you have to win by a certain number of quarters, you must have figured that if I'm not making a sum of, if I'm not adding up all of the points that I won in all of the quarters, that could be a tie. So I could be 2-2 like against my opponent at the end of the fourth quarter. And instead of approaching that and like naming it differently, just go like, overtime or something like that. They just ended up calling it a fifth quarter, and that doesn't make any sense. Like, if it's a quarter, it's not a fifth. It's 4 quarters makes one whole. So I don't know, call it a tiebreaker. Don't just ditch every single nomenclature from the score lines from traditional tennis. It's fair enough to call it a tiebreaker, especially because it's kind of like a subtle, not subtle, like a sudden death format in the sense, like I feel like I think it's the point is if you win by 2 points, if at some point you're winning by 2 points, you win the match. So that's kind of like how we work. And a lot of fans really hated it. At least on Twitter, everybody was just bashing on it like it was the worst thing that could have ever happened to tennis. And honestly, I don't think it's bad. Like, I mean, it's an experiment. We've been having talks about how to change a little bit, bring some change to the score system in tennis, so matches wouldn't last for 6 hours or 7. And tiebreakers were instituted for a reason, so now there is a tiebreaker at Wimbledon as well at 12 all. I don't think that there is a tiebreaker in Roland Garros yet, but who cares, because Nadal never really goes to a tiebreaker in the 5th anyways. So yeah, and I think all of the Grand Slams except for Roland Garros now have a tiebreaker in the 5th. So all in all, I do think it's a good idea to try and do things differently, and it's a great opportunity because there's no professional tennis, there's no actual tennis tournaments that are being played. So they actually got to have professional players like the stars. They had Tsitsipas, Gasquet, Matteo Berrettini playing. I don't know who else was playing. I can't remember. But I think it's a great time, and people really were hating on it, and they were just kind of like, "Oh yeah, tennis is perfect the way it is," and no. And I'm just like, I mean, I do love tennis the way it is. I think it makes up for like a very interesting scoreline, but I do have a point in terms of it's a little bit difficult to understand, and it can go really, really long, and can be a really slow pace game at some points. So I'm all for experimenting. And it's an exhibition, so do it there. I feel like it has to be done strategically, not just kind of like out of the blue. And now that all of those exhibitions are out of the way, and for a lot of us are just like, thank God I can even wait. I can't stand any more exhibitions happening. I just don't care about them anymore. It's kind of like I want to see some actual tennis being played, something that is worth something. Just an exhibition isn't really worth anything. It's just kind of like entertainment. So in sports, there's the stake of like the records and the tournaments that have points in the rankings, and the titles are worth something. If you're playing like at the UTS or the Adria Tour, it's not gonna come back next year. It's not gonna happen again. So nobody really cares. Like, who is gonna remember the champion of this tournament? I don't even remember who is it now. So I want to watch the US Open, and I want to watch the Roland Garros, and I watch Wimbledon, and I want to watch all of the Masters 1000s and WTA Premier mandatories, because that's what we want for tennis. It's kind of like if you're watching the super, not the CFL, but like the NFL or the NHL. You don't just kind of like want at the end, oh yeah, we just want to play a number of games and that's it. Like, we want to see who goes to the playoffs and wins the Stanley Cup or the Super Bowl. This is what is important. This is why this is awesome to watch. So, and there we come to the point where tennis seems to be going to restart in August 31st, and that means obviously Wimbledon has already been canceled for a while, but we also gonna miss the Rogers Cup. They announced it today or yesterday, I think it was today, that today being Wednesday, June 17th, as per the date I am recording. So for you it would be Thursday, June 18th, or Friday, June 19th. It depends on my moods on editing this thing. But I'm really hoping you're listening to this on Thursday, the 18th, or at least that it comes out on Thursday, the 18th. But I'm not talking about dates and calendars here. Well, I will be talking about calendars, but more specifically about tennis. But in any case, Rogers Cup is not happening in Toronto or in Montreal. The Montreal one was already canceled because of a Quebec ruling. The government ruled out every single big tournament, not tournament, but like every big event until at least August 31st. So that was already a thing that was out of question. But Toronto was still in the plans. Like, it was still on the table. It could still have happened, but it's not going to happen. So that's a little sad. No Canadian Open this year, but honestly, hope this is for the best, and that we can stay all healthy, and that we can avoid at all costs a second wave of the COVID-19. But the US Open is probably going to happen, and this is also very controversial. As I've mentioned, Djokovic had his share of doubts about it, and not only he has them, but a bunch of other top players are not necessarily very keen on going to New York and playing. And New York is actually one of the biggest epicenters of the crisis, the pandemic in the U.S. So it's all the more concerning that this is going on. So they have put up a bunch of several rules, for which I'm going to read in here for a little bit. I believe. Let's see if I can find them here. Okay, here you go. This is from ESPN. The article is called "U.S. Open Plan in Works, including group flights, COVID-19 tests." This came out in May 30th. So they actually had already this, like a bunch of this already planned, but they confirmed just yesterday or today that tennis, the U.S. Open is actually taking place. But this is what is probably going to happen. They haven't already clarified exactly all of their measures, but testing, they will be as according to ESPN, they say before traveling to New York, players would need proof of negative COVID-19 test. Once they came into our, let's say, U.S. Open world, Alistair said. Alistair is I think the USTA president. There will be a combination of daily health questionnaires, daily temperature checks, and some nasal salival antibody testing. Charters, Paris, Vienna, Frankfurt, Buenos Aires, and Dubai are among the cities where players could catch a flight to John F. Kennedy International Airport on an airline that is a tournament partner. Afterward, players might be taken to where they play next. Tournament sites in late September could include Paris, Madrid, or Rome. Entourage. A player coming with an entourage of 5, 6, 7, 8 is not something that's in the plan, Alistair said. One possibility, tournaments could provide physiotherapists and masseuses to players, so players don't bring their own. Officiating matches could use fewer line judges than usual, with more reliance on line calling technology. It's a hard one, Alistair said. Obviously, we want to ensure that we have the highest level of integrity, and the ball people are going to be all adults, no kids. And in terms of the officiating, I feel like this is a great opportunity to try and get Hawkeye to work all the time. This is going to be, it's going to take away a little bit of the just the tension of the match. Is going to be less intense when players decide when to challenge or when not to challenge. But at the same time, it's definitely going to guarantee that the match is going to go more safely. Not safely, but like with more integrity, more honesty, with actual good calls being made 100% of the time. But it also, Hawkeye is not necessarily 100% foolproof, but it's probably better than just tons of lines people, as per we know, because challenges are used all the time now. They also plan on having reduced draws in doubles, no mixed doubles, and no juniors. The draws and doubles would be down to 32 teams instead of the regular 64. They would also have no fans, and players wouldn't be able to go to Manhattan. They're essentially, what they would do is that they would go straight from the hotel to the match, and from the match to the hotel. They would have no access to the locker room. They would have access to the site to practice, but no access to the locker room. And it's just kind of like keeping kind of like access on site to a minimum. And yeah, there's no fans are going to be allowed on site, and that's probably the weirdest thing. Like, I mean, Djokovic mentioned a bit about how he didn't want to have, because he says, oh yeah, like I want to come in with like all of the 6 people that are with me and whatever, like all of my team and whatnot. But some players are really kind of like saying, "Come on, man! Like we need to play." There's a lot of low ranked players who don't even have that many people. They barely even have a coach, and so this is kind of like not a concern that is shared with the vast majority of players on tour. So, and by the way, this is what Dan Evans from the UK said about this issue. From the article, Dan Evans says Novak Djokovic concerns over US Open restrictions only valid for top players. This is from BBC. It's great what the ATP did with the relief fund, but there is nothing better than the prize money of the Grand Slams for the players to be receiving. This is the point where I think players should really come together, and Novak and Rafa should be really looking to help those players with lower ranks so they get a good payday. It's obviously not all about money is health involved here, but it's safe enough that I don't think having just a coach is good enough reason not to be going to a tournament. So this is kind of like they kind of pushing for the big players to actually go and play in the US Open, because Rafa Nadal and Novak Djokovic have already expressed their issues, and they're likely not going to the US Open this year, which is going to make the draw far more open this time. And but Serena Williams is playing, so that's a good thing. Maybe she's going to be able to break Margaret Court's. I'm not sure if she's tying or breaking it. I think she'd be tying Margaret Court's record of 24 US Open, not US Opens, but Grand Slams in general. Other players who are not going are probably Barty, Ashley Barty, WTA number 1, and Simona Halep, WTA World number 2. So yeah, essentially the top men and women are not coming for the top 2 rankings. And yeah, we're going to have to see how it goes. But one of the things for me, it's at this point, we've just been waiting for so long for tournaments to happen that any news that is going to happen just kind of like makes us kind of like excited to at least see what's going to happen. Like, how is this going to turn out? And so this is going to be a once in a lifetime opportunity to see things like that. But yeah, and the other tournament that is having its share of controversies since I guess May has been Roland Garros, and man, they've messed up a few times this year already. They said that they were going to hold their tournament in a date that was going to overlap with Shanghai or whatever, and they just kind of like did this unilaterally. So it's not really the point of rescheduling the tournament that's bad. The point that it was bad about Roland Garros was that they just kind of did it without taking anybody into account. They just didn't ask anybody for permission or what did they think or an opinion or suggestion, or even an advice, or just kind of like, hey man, like just texting on WhatsApp, like, yo, what do you think about us doing this? No, they just kind of like went out online and just like, hey, because of COVID-19 measures, France sucks for now. We're just gonna hold it in September, okay? Shanghai, screw you, type of thing. So everybody was really mad, and with reason, because it's not just because they're a Grand Slam and they're a very prestigious tournament that can just go around and make decisions like nobody else existed. There's a lot of things involved and a lot of money, and there's a lot of planning that goes into that too. Players have to plan where they go to. It's not like they can just be everywhere at the same time, and flights also cost money, and it's not all of the players that actually have access to so much wealth, such as Novak Djokovic and essentially the entire top 10 really. So yeah, it's something that has to be done with the cooperation and collaboration of the ITF and the ATP and the WTA and everybody else involved, and all the other Grand Slams as well. So yeah, but Roland Garros, apparently, I did not confirm this source. It's from a website called Essentially Sports or Essentially Tennis. Let me check. Yeah, it's called Essentially Sports. So apparently the French Open is going to be held with a reduced draw of 96 players for both men and women. And they're also going to have reduced doubles, and obviously also no mixed and no juniors. But one of the things that is most interesting about Roland Garros this year is that as opposed to the US Open, which is going to be held just about at the same time of the year, the Roland Garros is going to be held significantly later in the year. And there is a few things that going to, what's it called? They're going to play when this happens. As we know, like in the northern countries, temperatures change and climate is not as constant. Like, for example, where I come from in Brazil, you could be almost safe that you wouldn't make that much of a difference. It will make a difference, but honestly, for tennis players, changing from summer to fall, it's a world of a difference, honestly. Like, they can feel the bounce, they can feel the speed of the ball, and the minimum of the slightest detail, something that like a regular human being, like a regular recreational player would barely feel, or just kind of like, oh yeah, I just can deal with that. Like, for players, it can cost them the tournament. Really, it could cost the tournament to Nadal to play in a different time of the year, and some are even saying that it could even favor people like Isner or big servers, big attacking players. You wouldn't necessarily be very clay court specialists would struggle with that, because the temperatures have normally been very favorable for those people in that sense, because like it's a slow court and playing in slow conditions obviously helps them. And just kind of like take into for example, Madrid, which is played in it's a little higher up in the sense that it's a much higher above sea level than other tournaments, and the conditions there tend to be a little bit faster. Hence why this is the clay court that Nadal has won the least amount of times, as opposed to Monte Carlo, for example, which is right by the sea. So conditions are much slower. It fits far better his game. So some of the things that are going to happen is the temperature is going to be lower, especially in the evening. There's probably going to be more rain, and the wind's basically not going to change much. But the most important part of the different date is going to be the difference in the time of sunset. And it's almost nitpicky, but it's such an important thing. The sunset in Roland Garros in Paris, really, during May, June, is from 9. It's about 9:43 p.m. So that's pretty late, and those tournaments, I think Roland Garros up until last year, it didn't even have any lights, so they could go on much later. But now it's going to be at 7:41, so it's going to be a considerable difference. It's going to be 2 hours earlier. The sun's going to set, and now they do have a roof and they do have lights, but it's still going to change the conditions. It's still going to change how the ball is visible to players. It could favor some players more than others. It could essentially cost the tournament to Nadal. In that regard, it could very well go to somebody else. So that's also one of the reasons why I believe Nadal and Djokovic are not going to participate in the US Open, because of that. I think Djokovic wants another Roland Garros, and I think Nadal wants to defend his title. That's fair enough. And also another issue that there is with the US Open is that upon return to their countries, to other tournaments, a lot of players would have to be quarantined. So they would have to be home for 14 days. So that could cost a lot of their time, and essentially it would just mean that they would play only one tournament. And here's why it's really important right now, I think even more than a regular season, to plan where you're going to go, because the ATP just released the most absurd calendar I've ever seen for a tennis season ever. And yes, we're excited, and yes, we're going to have tons of great tournaments, but here's what's going to happen. First off, they're going to start in Washington, D.C. With the City Open, an ATP 500 tournament. And August 22nd, they're going to play Cincinnati, except it's not going to be in Cincinnati. It's going to be at Flushing Meadows. So the tournament that would be Cincinnati is going to be held in New York City, and the same courts that the U.S. Open is going to have takes place normally and will take place this year as well. And 31st of August, if you remember well, that's the date that New York, the U.S. Open is going to start. That's literally just a week later after the first, well, the ATP Masters 1000, the first one after the big crisis when the ATP Tour returns. That's, by the way, just the ATP. That's not the WTA. I haven't really checked what's the calendar, what's the deal for the WTA. But yeah, if I find something online, I will certainly leave it in the description. But WTA is being a little bit more conservative, I would say, in terms of the tournaments. But I think all of those tournaments are going to be essentially the same for the women as well. So the first thing that we come across here is that you play Cincinnati, you have to commit for the ATP 1000, and if you win, immediately you're thrown into the US Open. So that's already something really strange. I don't know if it's ever happened before. Probably it must have, like at some point, like having a big tournament right before New York. And then right after New York, we have Madrid in the 13th of September. As you know, Grand Slams take 2 weeks to finish. And the 20th of September, we have Rome. So that's the entire clay court. The 2 of the 3 clay courts, Masters 1000s, in back-to-back weeks, back-to-back from the US Open, like immediately after, in succession, in Cincinnati, US Open, Madrid, Rome. And immediately after Rome, we have Paris. So this is pretty ridiculous. They're going to have to really assess like which tournaments are they going to do. And they're kind of like going for back and forth in terms of like how are they going to deal with the rankings and stuff. And that's actually the most important part, because there's no way a player is going to be able to play all of those tournaments like one after the other and do well in all of them. If a player manages to win Cincinnati, New York, Madrid, Rome, and Roland Garros, Paris, back-to-back in a row, and when I say back-to-back, I mean it, like it's non-stop 5 weeks of playing, that's going to be an achievement for the ages. That is, no player will ever be able to accomplish anything similar to that. And it's not just because it's the COVID-19 situation. There's just no way a player can play at the top level in the top tournaments so consistently for 5 straight weeks. That's just pretty dang ridiculous. So there was even a guy that commented on the ATP page where I got the image from the calendar. He says, so Nadal is defending US Open, French, and Rome championships, and he would have to play all 3 tournaments in about 1 month's time frame to defend all titles, especially the 2 slams. Sounds fair to me. Yeah, Nadal would have to play New York and Paris at least. That's all of those tournaments are 5,000 points. If he loses all of those points, he drops out of the top 5. He's still into the top 10, but he is going to lose a lot of ground in terms of the number 1 ranking from Novak Djokovic. Of course, Djokovic should probably lose a lot of points as well. So if rankings keep the same format up to the end of the year, we might see some really big changes actually in the top 10, because honestly, it's going to be really weird. And all of the no fans thing and top 3, big 3 not being able to play. And by the way, Roger Federer isn't playing until 2021 now, because he's had a second arthroscopic surgery on his knee. And so he's out for the 2020 season regardless of what happens. So no Federer anymore. So probably no Novak and no Nadal for the US Open, which is going to be extremely, extremely bizarre. And we might even see like a completely new champion from the US Open this year. And dare I say, even Roland Garros could see a completely different champion. This year, we could have the beginning of the year, which was, all right, we'd have Novak Djokovic won the Australian Open, and I don't remember if they played Dubai. I think they did. And but team reached the final, and I don't know exactly where did Nadal drop out from the Australian Open. I believe it was the quarterfinals. But that's kind of like going according to script in a certain way. But then this is just going to completely turn everything upside down. Like, we just really have zero clue what's happening at this point. Like, tennis is just totally up in the air. Like, it's a total screw it situation. We have no idea who's going to win what. There's big chances, obviously, that a top 10 player is going to win those tournaments, but we might see 2 new Grand Slam champions in August and September. Like, who knows? So we just kind of like wait and see. It's a lot of at this point, it's just a lot of us tennis fans being like, I really want tennis to come back and I really want to watch it. And the excitement is twofold because, well, tennis is coming back. Yay, that's awesome. But also just kind of like, oh, this is totally new. This is totally different. We're not used to seeing this. We can make predictions. We are just completely in the dark about what's going to happen at the remainder of the season. This seems to be I think this schedule is going to be like that until the end. I don't know if they're going to play the Asian swing. There might be a chance that they're just gonna finish right there. The season just gonna play August, September, and that's it. And I think one of the reasons why they kind of have to rush those is because none of those tournaments are inherently indoor tournaments. I think Madrid isn't an indoor tournament either. And it's going to be so they cannot be playing indoors, and it's just not feasible to play it in the end of autumn and of the fall and in the winter. There's just no way this is going to happen. So they just kind of have to rush them in, otherwise it's just not going to happen. To be honest, maybe Roland Garros could have just been postponed and that's it. We just have Australian Open and the US Open this year, and that's fine. But man, it's weird. Like, I could just be here kind of like talking about like what I think might happen in tennis and whatnot. But man, it's just a wait and see situation, and it feels like it's going to happen next week. But honestly, we're going to have to wait until mid-August for the first tournament to come to be played. And well, another thing that I'm really not concerned, but like I'm really anxious about seeing is who is going to be playing in these tournaments. And yeah, the last thing that I wanted to touch upon was the no fans situation, because there's a big chance that Roland Garros also is going to be held without fans. I know for a fact that Washington, Cincinnati, and the US Open are not going to accept fans, or at least they're going to have very little number of fans enter the stadiums. So that's going to be a little weird. But the thing for me is that we have to look at this issue from a couple different sides, right? So for the first side is the fan side, obviously. Like, who is very excited to watch a tennis tournament or any sports event really on stadium. It really is a different atmosphere. It really changes a lot of things, and it's just really fun. And not having the fans out there just kind of loses a little bit of its appeal. Even though you can still watch the match and it's still probably going to be really high level, it's just going to be a totally different experience and really weird and strange. But But yeah, and the other side of the situation that we have to look into is the players themselves. As I've mentioned from a quote from Daniel Evans, players have been struggling a lot lately from the lack of revenue from because they can't play, so they cannot make money. So that really is going to be not that's really not ideal for them. And the top players they're fine, but the lower ranked players, they're really kind of like on the brink. They're just kind of like, what am I going to do? How am I going to deal with it? So yeah, but having the tournament being played even without fans is good for the sport in general, even if it's less than ideal right now and it's going to be a little strange and it's just not going to feel right. But honestly, we need to we gotta get things going. We gotta get things moving because they're not just there for fun. They're actually there for a living, a lot of them. And a lot of players are very eager to get back on playing their qualifying tournaments and just playing a couple rounds of the US Open. The money that they're going to receive from those matches is going to be really important for them. And to be perfectly honest, I am fully in agreement with that. I completely agree that tennis should be held even without fans, at least to keep things alive. And we need to get things going. It's not just about us, the fans. It's because if there's no tennis at the end of this in 2020 anymore, there could be a big chance of it's kind of like lots of tennis players just kind of giving up tennis. They're just gonna hang up their rackets and that's it. So I don't want that to happen. I want tennis players to have the opportunity to kind of like do what they love. And the tennis community, I feel like we need to support this decision to have no fans. And even if it's to the remainder of 2020, if we have no more fans in any tournament, I am totally fine with it. We're just gonna watch it on TV, and that's okay. And during this pandemic, I've been reading a lot more, and also because I've started doing this podcast, I've been trying to get a lot more information than I would normally do. But I've been gaining a lot of respect for lower ranked players because they really go day in, day out, and they really practice hard, and they play those qualifying tournaments. They take them really seriously. It's not just because they're not going to become the champions, most likely, that it means they just kind of like slacking off, or they're just no good, or that we just shouldn't care about them. Like, honestly, we should care about everybody that makes the tennis the sport that it is. And I'm honestly really grateful for their effort, and I really respect them. And I'm just going to finish this episode on a note that I thought was kind of actually quite hilarious from the US Open tournament directors. And so there's no fans. That is my segue. They're talking in the higher management of the US Open is like, oh yeah, we're going to have like completely new and exciting experiences to engage with fans and whatnot, like through online. And this is what they said. Like, honestly, I feel like this is total BS in my opinion. I think they may revamp a bit of their online influence and trying to get some things going, but it's going to be barely any different. Like for people from home, it's whatever. Like, they're just gonna watch the match, and I feel like it's not going to make a difference. I hope I'm wrong. I hope it's actually going to be very new and engaging, but I don't think it's going to be innovative at all. I think it's just going to be them posting more videos on their YouTube page and Instagram and whatnot. And here's what the tournament director says, which by the way is for the first time a female. The decision to hold the 2020 US Open without fans was not an easy one, but ultimately it was the correct one. Fair enough. Stacey Alistair, Chief Executive, Professional Tennis USTA, and newly named US Open Tournament Director. I said before that she was the president of the USTA. I was wrong. She is the tournament director. To mitigate risk, we must minimize numbers on site. Though we will not have fans on our site, we will engage with tennis fans around the world in new and exciting ways with the help of our global broadcast partners and all our US Open sponsors. And then this is the comment that I feel like resumes perfectly the difference between marketing people and just irregular fans. Says Governor Andrew Cuomo from New York. We can watch it on TV. Noted New York Governor Andrew Cuomo in a Tuesday press conference. And I'll take that. This is essentially it. Like, it doesn't matter, like, the engaging in new ways. Like, it's not going to be innovative enough to cover the fact that there's going to be no fans. But his opinion is just sincere. Like, we can watch it on TV and that's fine. Like, this is literally all that is going to be in the end of the day with the no fans thing. And I just thought it was kind of funny, the huge contrast. And this is literally, I didn't skip a line. You can see it in the US Open website, 2020 US Open, Western and Southern Open to be held in New York. That's the name of the article. I'm going to leave a link in the description of this episode and on the Facebook page and the Instagram as well. It's literally one paragraph after the other. So I thought it was incredibly funny, just juxtaposition of that. But in any case, that's all I have for the tennis comeback. I'm quite excited. I'm not sure if you can tell by the way I'm speaking, and I may have gotten lost a few times in my train of thoughts, but that's just because there's so much to think about. As I said, everything is up in the air, and I'm just kind of going crazy because I cannot make any predictions about it. I just have nothing. I just have no expectations because we can't really expect anything. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and make sure that if you liked it, you follow me on Facebook and you follow me on Instagram. It's Tennis and Bagels for both of them. And if you want to follow me on Twitter as well, I'm always tweeting at and Rolenberg and A&D, like Tennis and Bagels, and Rolenberg, ROLEMBERG. That's my Twitter for y'all. And yeah, let me know what you guys think about the crazy tennis comeback. So there you have it. Have a good one, everybody. Bye-bye. Just a note to add that I kind of forgot to talk. And as I've been browsing through Twitter afterwards and seeing people's opinions, by the way, players are very active on Twitter. Not all of them, but a lot of them are. It seems that there is far more controversy in people being very much for the US Open and some people being very much against it. So at this point, I would actually not even rule out a full cancellation of the season altogether. I feel like this is still a possibility that is very much on the table. And that's my note for this episode. I still hope you liked it, and I was still very excited, but honestly, I kind of got carried away by my excitement about the season coming back, and there is far more to go rather than that. But honestly, there is still the survival of the companies there in there is still the survival of the companies is still it's something that we must take into consideration as well. They're having to lay off temporarily some personnel. The USTA has laid off some hundreds of people, coaches and whatnot because of that. So you kind of have to weigh some pros and cons, I feel like. But there is still the possibility of the full cancellation of the season. So we'll still have to wait and see. Tennis is not necessarily back yet, and it might not be. I kind of hope it will, but honestly, there are concerns and there are doubts still. But that's it. Yep. Have a good one. Bye-bye.